lines, buy themselves a home, and then commute back downtown where the action really still was focused economically. So he made his money through real estate, and he served his real estate empire with his trolley empire. And he also invested in electric power generation, and he owned many of the major electric generating facilities. So he powered his own cars. He sold the surplus fuel to the municipal grid, so he made money that way. And he made money, but very little. In fact, didn't make much money at all, actually selling tickets on these red cars and yellow cars. Now, there's kind of a myth in the air about this, which is that at some point, the evil car companies, especially GM, Firestone, and Standard Oil, sneakily bought up these train systems and then on purpose caused them to go out of business so that there wouldn't be an effective public transportation system. And then everybody would be sort of forced to drive around in a car, which they were manufacturing. That myth was popularized in the early 70s by a legislative analyst named Snell, who basically came up with that idea. But that has been pretty well rethought and debunked. What actually happened is that nobody was happy riding these railway cars. Yes, they were effective, they allowed you to move around, but the public was getting more and more irate with the structure of the railway system. I mean, if you look at that map, the orange lines are the cars, the routes, or the Pacific Electric, which looks like this. And this is a little earlier, but it's the same, similar network. What is there to complain about? I mean, what is spatially non-desirable for by such a track system? If you live, somewhere way out east, you might have a railway line that gets you to where you live, but can you go from that tentacle way out on the east, can you go from there straight to, say, Eagle Rock or Pasadena or Glendale? You can't go across town. You have to go back downtown where all these routes converge, transfer, and then head back to your destination. These things were like starfish. You'd always have to go back to the center and then transfer and head out somewhere else. So there was no quick and easy route to transfer lines. And people said, wow, this is the, Huntington and the people who control these railways. All they're doing is making money off their real estate. They don't care about serving the public. The public needs mass transportation, and we can't do it. We were forced to go downtown. It's inefficient. And on top of that, there were plenty of accidents. 5 minutes to go. There were lots of accidents that were occurring. You can imagine even when they opened the new Orange Line, there were lots of accidents. So this caused a lot of accidents. They thought, well, they're rushing, they're not paying attention, they're inefficient. Plus, they're bribing the politicians, which was common enough for public utilities and railway companies to do in those days. And just seemingly frustratingly unfriendly to the average person. So this kind of encouraged people to look for an alternative. I mean, the first instinct was to try to repair this system. They could never do it. So the alternative to that was the automobile. The problem, and a lot of people as early as 1910 were in fact driving around in automobiles, those who could, because they were so frustrated trying to make their life work on these public railways. The problem was downtown at that point still used to be the focal point of economic life in LA, and you had fixed rail on the streets combined with moving cars. And it created these amazing traffic snarls as the population kept growing and as downtown still was the focus of commercial life in the city. What could you do? It was such a headache that the city government banned parking in 1920, and it almost started a civil war. They overturned the parking ban, but they still had this enormous problem. The other option available was what they did in other places like Chicago, lift up the subway onto an elevated track or put it underground. And a consulting firm in 1925 recommended doing both, put 30 miles above ground and 90 below ground, leave the street level for car traffic, but that cost an awful lot of money, which these companies actually did not have, and no one was willing to invest in them because of their sort of shoddy reputation. So they were already going out of business. People were already opting for the automobile well before these systems were finally sold and closed down. There was no sort of grab in there by GM to close a benevolent and well-functioning and highly appreciated public transit network. That's the rethink on this. The other component historically is that in the 1920s, when this shift was occurring, ridership was going down on the trolleys, automobile ownership was going up. That was the decade of the city's greatest real estate boom to date. And you had vast open spaces like this suddenly being marketed, and the advertising made no mention of access to railway lines. The key now was you have access to roads. It really marks, the way this boom was promoted, that the automobile had become accepted, just out of necessity by that time. So the car was winning this race. The car, as was pointed out, was seen as the friend of the average person. It was democratizing. You didn't have to go by the railway's schedule or along its route. You could go anytime you wanted, anywhere you wanted. And that led to the kind of city that we now live in, which is spread out, designed around the automobile, because once the planners saw what the public had already chosen, they went in that direction, and all planning energies focused on street planning and spreading the city out spatially so it is not too, not very high. There's low buildings. They tend to be spread way out from each other because the presumption is 90% of the people are driving everywhere they go, and that can be that's a positive good. We are not replicating the cities of the East Coast that developed more firmly during the pre-automobile days, which have much more dense downtowns, kind of congested areas, tall tenement-type buildings crammed against each other. That had a kind of negative feeling to it. So Los Angeles, with lots of space, the preference for the car, its youthfulness and ability to mold the car into planning the city from that point on, gave us this kind of sprawling city that we now have. And there's a lot of environmental problems that we now face because of that. How do we fuel those cars when fuel starts running out? How do we improve the public transportation network that we rejected in the 20s? That's about it.
Pat McLaughlin is a firm principal with MIG, a West Coast-based planning, communications, and design firm. Our most recent projects include leading public engagement for the successful I-710 major corridor study and subsequent environmental impact report and environmental impact statements. Managing policy, planning, and agency engagement for the Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, regional congestion pricing study, conducting the Ventura County Transportation Commission Transit Organization Study, and comprehensive transportation plan public outreach, and initiating the Orange County Transportation Authority strategic plan.
Thank you, Professor. What I'd like to do today is to introduce all of you to the corridor where the city of Bell resides. I think finally the I-710 corridor has become familiar because of the city of Bell, but it is a corridor with a very rich history, and it's a corridor that it has certain environmental and sustainability struggles that I'd like to review with you. So, this is the I-710 corridor. It consists of about 23 cities, and it stretches all the way from the port of Long Beach down here, where the I-710 serves the major ports, all the way up to East Los Angeles. And these cities are very diverse. They're cities that have a very rich history. It was the actual first home. This is not Oxnard, by the way. This is the I-710 corridor. I think it's the city of Bell Gardens. And it started out with a history of land grants, agriculture, the ranchos, but also had a historic in agriculture. And actually, Farmer John is still here. All of our local sausages and bacon and things like that come from the Farmer John plant here. And it had a history of beet packing, but then with the rise of rail and port development, there was a lot more emphasis on imports and exports. In 1869, the first railroad went from the ports to Los Angeles, and in 1911, first cargo ships started coming in. And then in 1940, the aerospace industry started in that corridor and provided the first true white-collar jobs in the corridor. So it moved from a farming community, a shipyard community, into being a white-collar home for aerospace and auto workers. Signal Hill, it fuels your discussion about fuels. The Signal Hill oil discovery was in 1921, and you can still see a lot of the oil wells out there. And in 1928, Firestone Tire and Rubber Plant started, and then 1936, the GM factory in Southgate, and also a Ford plant. And in 1970s and 80s, saw the almost total collapse of these industries and a really struggling economy because of that, and a concern about economic sustainability. Although the Firestone Tire and Rubber Plant, any of you who go by and see the Citadel outlets, that building was actually the Firestone Tire and Rubber Plant. The I-710 is one of the oldest freeways in Los Angeles County and in the nation. In 1952, the first section opened, and you can see the lovely swimsuit models here opening the I-710, the first section. And in 1970, the last section opened, but by 1990, the freeway was seriously out of date and is one of the most dangerous corridors for motorists in the country. The future of distribution was here too with 3CPO, the Star Wars guy. He's right there posing with the proud certified grocers who are dealing with the mechanized distribution center. And the surge in port growth is what's really challenging this corridor right now, because the ports are a true economic engine for the area and the whole area. But in 1959 was actually the first time that containers started coming into the ports, and there were 20 containers that were brought in. And by 2009, that swelled to 14 million containers. So when you see the trucks going by with the containers on them, they're called TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units. Those are all coming from the port or going back to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And many of these are actually destined elsewhere. Anybody who has clothing, iPods, things that come from China, those are all being distributed across the country in a vast network, and this gives you an idea. The thickness of the line indicates the volume of containers that are going in. Is there anybody in the room that thinks that they have any item of clothing on or anything with them that does not come from China or is not imported? Good, great for you. I did a quick tag check on myself this morning, and I think my entire wardrobe that I have on, I'm not sure about my socks, but everything came from China. And even though I try very hard to buy things that don't come from China, it's almost impossible to not have things that come from China. There are really big benefits of this freight movement system to Southern California nation. It sustains 1 million jobs in Southern California, and it supports an additional 2 million jobs across the nation. This is just our container traffic, our ports and our goods. And 1 out of 7 Southern California jobs are linked to the ports or to goods movement. But it causes problems. This is the I-710 freeway, and how many of you actually have driven on the I-710 freeway? How many of you have been frightened for your life when you've been boxed in by trucks? So that's what we deal with on a daily basis in this corridor. And it's unsafe, and also the communities there are very special communities. Despite what you hear about Bell, they have a rich history, they're beautiful communities, they have a lot of parks and open space. But because of the visual blight along the freeways, many people are embarrassed to say that they live near the I-710 freeway, and they actually will reroute people going to their houses so that they don't ever go on that freeway, because they don't want people to know that they live there. The most serious problem, though, is air quality and health, and I'm not sure you can see this well on this big screen, but the cancer risk in this corridor, this is the darker purple, the cancer risk in this corridor is about 20 times what it is in the more safe corridors. And any place that you see a freeway, this is where we were talking, don't buy a house near the freeway. Any place